Man, I wonder what's for lunch, breakfast, and dinner.
I don't know, but I'm hungry.
Yeah, it made me hungry.
Am I treating today? I guess that's yes.
I'm just having a rough time over here, guys. Somebody asked something about stimulus checks.
Which one? The federal stimulus checks?
Yeah, the federal.
Well, Daphne yesterday said that
they printed 20,000
right.
Checks on Mother's Day, and so they're supposed to be out in the mail. Someone had put a comment like, "Can you tell us when they mail it so we don't have to check our mail every day?" No, go check your mail. That it? You kind of go check your mail. I mean, do your part. Go check the mail. 9:30. So Tuesday, the May 12th here. Well, let's get FEMA Frank on. Frank Mansell, the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, good morning.
Hi, Frank.
Good morning. I've washed my hands.
Nice, good. Preemptive, I like that.
Yeah.
How are things over there at the Joint Information Center? Is that where you're at this morning, Frank?
Yes, it is.
And they're playing the show, right?
Oh, I imagine so. I know I am.
That's cool. Thank you. So I sent you some inquiries last night. I don't know if you were able to look at that.
I was.
Okay, and just so we'll go down the line. So we wanted to touch on what is reimbursable under the FEMA Public Assistance Program, which Guam is approved for when we received the Major Disaster Declaration. We were looking through the Public Assistance Program Policy Guide, and I guess our first question is overtime a reimbursable expense?
Yes, overtime is reimbursable. Regular time, not, but it's under Category B, which is a 75-25 cost split under the Emergency Protective Measures section.
So you're saying that nurses, doctors, frontliners who work overtime as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic emergency, that expense would be covered at the clip of 75% from the federal government?
If it's overtime, yes.
Okay. Yeah, because we just had heard that nurses weren't getting their overtime, and it's pretty frustrating. There's a protest, but so we wanted to, again, ask you if that was something that was reimbursable. Have you guys gotten any paperwork from GovGuam yet, or is this something that they give you after the fact, or is it like as we go?
I have not seen any paperwork, have not heard of any paperwork. I have reached back to see if anything has flowed through back to the region for processing, but at this point, no.
I see. But there's some criteria, right, that has to be met for reimbursement, like justifications maybe?
Well, justifications are always part of the process. It's to make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and certainly within the terms of the agreement and the law, for that matter.
Right. Let me ask you this next question here then, Frank. Is the new COVID differential pay eligible for reimbursement since it was created by the governor by way of executive order in the middle of the pandemic emergency?
That would be, at this point, it would appear not, because it would have been included normally within the agreement when it was first signed. However, I have not seen the paperwork on that. But at this point, if it was introduced after the fact, that's not part of the original agreement and would likely not be considered.
Okay.
I don't know if you're
but
familiar.
It could be, right, for the CARES Act, the $118 million.
I'm sorry, what about the CARES Act?
The $118 million that the government received.
Right, so we're just not sure if they're going to pay this COVID differential out of the CARES Act funding. I don't know what the Treasury guidelines say on that, or if it's something they were trying to seek the FEMA reimbursement for, which is why we wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So are you familiar with the double pay, which is laid out in administrative rules and regulations? There was something that I had read in the pandemic policy guide about what was reimbursable, and they had mentioned something about written agreements that exist prior to the emergency declaration. And so I'm wondering if you could at all clarify the Department of Administration personnel rules and regs which go through the AAA process. Does that, in your opinion, count as a written agreement that would be, reimbursable by FEMA?
I have not seen that, and I think it would have to be explicitly spelled out in the agreement with federal and the territory.
Right, but in the pandemic policy guide, I think what it had said on page 23 was that you guys would reimburse things that were part of a labor policy or an agreement that existed before the state of emergency.
That's that's something I don't know about. So let me go into the pandemic, and that's our policy.
Yeah.
The public assistance.
You want me to send you a copy?
No, I can pull
I'm
it
kidding,
up.
Frank.
Well, thank you. I know you kid a lot.
Quite a kidder.
You're about as dry as I am.
So let me join you here on open our FEMA hymnal to page 23.
Thank you.
Public assistance program and policy guide.
Let me just...
Yeah, it here says under labor policies, FEMA determines the eligibility of overtime, premium pay, and compensatory time costs based on the applicant's pre-disaster written labor policy, provided the policy doesn't include a contingency clause that payment is subject to federal funding, is applied uniformly regardless of a presidential declaration, and has set non-discretionary criteria for when the applicant activates various pay types.
Okay.
And so I guess what I would do is I'll shoot you over that DOA rules and regs, and then you can kind of match it up and
I'll bounce that back with our guys on the mainland that look after the public assistance review.
Right.
So they aren't on the island, but
Right.
we do have people who look at that.
Nice, because I guess
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you in advance. Because there's this big argument about the double pay, which the first liners and first responders know that during a time of emergency they get the double pay. So that's why we wanted to ask if it's a reimbursable expense, then that kind of renders moot the whole argument that the governor has that she can't afford to pay it. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay, we will reach back and have an answer for you. It's about 4 o'clock there right now, but I will reach back.
Thank you, Frank. What can you give us in terms of FEMA updates?
Well, the big news is we've received an awful lot of test kits. We've received 7,800 swabs. We've received 1,600 Gene Expert cartridges, which are needed for testing. We've received serology test kits. We're just trying to determine exactly how many are in a box, so that's being looked at right now.
How many boxes?
2 boxes. So don't know how many that's for, but it seems light, but it's really dependent on what the what's in a box and how big the box is. So we'll like I say, we're looking at that right now. Our guys are unpacking that. And then the Abbott ID Now kits, we've got I think about 1,200 of those. So we've had an awful lot of test kits flow into the region since we last spoke. We do have a new local hire program that's been approved. So when FEMA enters a disaster, we have FEMA folks come in, and then we try and boost the economy by replacing those folks that came in, sending them home and replacing them with what are called local hires. So there are 5 positions open, and they can be found on usajobs.gov. And those are generally 1-year term positions, but what has happened is in 120-day increments they're reviewed, and it's our hope that those individuals will go on to become reservists and FEMA employees in case of disaster in the Pacific arena.
Hey, Frank, let me ask you, we just unearthed an email about providing meals for people who are staffing the quarantine facilities. Is that something that you think would be reimbursable?
Generally, that would be called a wraparound service, but in essence, if it was for the staff, I don't know if it would be considered part of the wraparound service. I'd have to check on that. That would
Okay.
be that would be a wag on my part.
Are you getting any?
Would wraparound services include those working at the governor's office and not at a quarantine facility, but maybe providing?
I doubt that it would have been spelled out anyway.
Right.
I see.
Are you getting catered meals, Frank?
No, but if we do partake in that, it's in the policy that we have to remove that from our per diem.
Well, you got a tight boss.
Hey, that's part of the rules.
Yeah, I got you.
All right. So when is the application deadline for these 5 positions?
The application deadline is just a second.
And qualifications for those positions.
The application for them is generally if you have experience in the Microsoft suite. That would be, Word, Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint. Proficiency in that, and if you have 1 year experience, that would be helpful, but not necessarily.
I see. And again,
Pardon
it's
me?
just for a limited term of 1 year, right?
Well, you're right. So the initial term's for 120 days, and then it's extended as needed up to a year. And during that time, we train the individuals for roles in that position and encourage them to become what are called reservists. And reservists are individuals that are on standby, and when the phone rings, you take your FEMA computer, your FEMA phone, and you get on a plane and go wherever you're requested to be. So that leaves some folks here on the island, which are very important time-wise to be deployed, and it gives these individuals an opportunity to just become part of the system. Mm-hmm. And that's how we grow our reservist cadre. Mm-hmm. And they're a big part of our effort in any disaster.
And again, when are you hoping to fill those 5 positions?
That will be on the USA Jobs website. I imagine the timeline on that would probably be a week. Generally, they say either a week or the first 200 applications.
All right. Anything else?
No, just the fact that we've got some materials flowing, and these are materials that were ordered by Guam, and we're finally receiving them and putting them out to the field. And as I said, anything I tell you are products that we can physically see and lay our hands on. It's not product that's in the pipeline.
Frank, are you in the loop about the homeless situation, the shelter?
The shelter, I guess that's still ongoing, so it's still being reviewed. It's not our program, but it's as I understand it, it's being reviewed and
reviewed by FEMA or
no, it's being reviewed by the
GovGuam?
Organization that's putting it together. Are they still requesting tents from FEMA or? I don't believe they are.
Okay.
So they unrequested the tents.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that the tents were ever on the table realistically, simply because the amount of space required for individual space that would be required for distancing, they couldn't have qualified that. And the true reason for those tents is to be available should a huge disaster hit, and tents be required immediately for individuals that are totally without shelter. So there just wasn't enough inventory there, and we would be risking, future preparedness, particularly with typhoon season on its way.
Right, and we're hearing from the Fed side that the HHS said favored a facility that was enclosed for the homeless.
I believe HHS has had some experience with other communities across the nation.
Right.
And they are certainly concerned about what's going to be successful and what hasn't been successful.
Right. Is it that hard, Frank, though? Because, I mean, geez, we're about a couple months into this, and they've been planning this homeless shelter. So in other jurisdictions where you've worked on, I mean, I know you never did another COVID-19, but from what you've seen, would it normally take this long to come up with a plan and then scrap it in the middle of the ball game? And
I'm not sure. I know that that's the type of program that whenever there is a disaster, we certainly get a lot of requests initially from the media, and the request is pretty much universal. It's what are you going to do about the homeless?
right.
And unfortunately, the Act doesn't require us, it doesn't allow us to offer a number of programs for the homeless, although they are eligible for immediate assistance through the Red Cross and through some feeding programs during the initial stages of the response. But once you get into the formal programs that are offered by FEMA, there's nothing there for individuals who are homeless before the disaster.
Well, you obviously have experience in responding to disasters, and the fact that the tents, you said that we had to keep them in FEMA's inventory because typhoon season is coming. So are you aware of any sort of discussions where we have to scrap this tent idea because with typhoon season coming and the possibility of this surge in September that we would probably need to put them in a hardened facility?
Well, I suppose there's two options. One is a hardened facility, and the other is the tents. So I don't know if there's a third option per se.
Right, but have you heard that that's where they're leaning, the government?
I have not. I know that, like I said, I think 2 Fridays ago, they indicated that they were just going to put it on hold and reassess it. So I don't know if that is going to include just a revisiting of the tents, or if it's going to revisit or look at hard sheltering.
Okay.
Well, thanks for that, Frank.
Well, let me go back to the hymnal and then reflect on the labor policy.
Right, thank you.
And my apologies for not having that.
No, that's fine, Frank. I didn't mean to. I know I texted you late last night, but I'd forgot to. A lot of things going on up in here.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Thanks,
you let us
Frank.
know, are they treating you okay over there? Or are you like the weird that no one's telling you anything because you're the feds?
We actually have a pretty good relationship.
That's
I know
good.
that the success of the program depends on different levels of government communicating with each other,
Right.
and that's necessary.
Right. Who's the GAR? Don't they communicate with FEMA? FEMA has to sign off on the agreement. And it was Tony Babalta. Is it still Tim Uggan? Because we had heard Bertha Duenas yesterday, but then it was corrected back to Tim Uggan.
I haven't seen anything on that. I know that with the resignation of the chief of staff and the GAR position, it was rewritten, and I haven't seen that.
Pretty juicy stuff in the headlines during this pandemic, huh, Frank?
I guess every disaster has its own nuances. I know that.
So classy.
working wildfires, it's the same thing. There
Right.
are certainly issues and positions posted that are unique with everyone. So I don't know that this is totally unusual.
Yeah, so we had asked John Jr. Cabo, the acting chief of staff, Adelup, when you have time, can you send us a copy of the new GAR agreement? And he said, yes, still waiting on FEMA documents. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So it has to go back to the region for sign-off.
Okay, right on.
So that like I say, I haven't seen, and
Right.
I'll see if I can find out if it's signed off and what it looks like.
Okay,
All right.
Frank, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Please, if you do get a copy of that, please send it our way too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, just send us whatever you got. We'll take it.
All right.
We're going to add it to our mountain of documents.
You do have a mountain of documents.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Thank you, Frank.
Wait till you get them.
Very good.
Take
Wash
care.
your hands
Thank-
again.
Okay, I will wash my hands.
Okay,
Okay,
that's
bye.
Frank Mansell. FEMA Frank. Let's keep it going here as we're going to